people. It's not every day, you know, in this CGI-laden blockbuster era that you come across a movie which is set in a very small location, and it keeps you hooked throughout the entire duration through the dialogue, the characters, and the setting alone. It's very rare that you come across a movie like that in this era. But here we are today talking to the man behind The Man from Earth, Mr. Richard Schenkman. Richard, thank you so much for joining.
It's my pleasure.
Richard, so tell me a little bit about your background. Like, how did you get into filmmaking? What's your origin story?
I was bit by a radioactive camera. I mean, honestly, from a really, really small age, like you, like a lot of people, you know, I'm just one of those guys that wanted to make movies from the time I was a kid. So I made, you know, 8mm animated movies, and I made little 16mm shorts, and I did all kinds of stuff like that. And then I went to college, and I couldn't afford to go to one of the better film schools in the country. So I ended up putting together my own film major at the college that I went to. I went to State University in New York, and they had a program where you could build your own, what they called an interdisciplinary major, if you could get a professor to sign off on it. So I did. There was one film teacher. He was in the art department, so he became my faculty advisor, and so I majored in film. And then my first job was at this new cable channel that was going to play rock videos 24 hours a day. That was called MTV, and that ended up being called MTV. So I did that, and then I left MTV after a number of years, and I had no company doing, you know, commercials and music videos and blah blah blah, and you know, and then I just did all kinds of stuff trying to figure out how to get a movie made, you know, making shorts, doing all sorts of things, and then finally, in 1995, I made my first movie. It was called The Pompatus of Love, and basically, I've been you know, to greater or lesser degree, depending on the year, I've basically been a struggling independent filmmaker since then, since 1995.
That's amazing. I really like the fact that you've been an independent filmmaker for, you know, a major part of your career. So when it comes to independent filmmaking, I mean, you juggle quite a lot of jobs, and you have you written your own material? How any experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, I assumed I was always going to be, you know, some kind of I mean, the way I thought my career was going to go was that I would start off, you know, writing and directing, or co-writing and directing, and then eventually I would get brought on to other projects, you know, projects that other people had written where they needed a director. Mm-hmm. And to a greater or lesser, you know, that has happened. I mean, I've written some stuff that I didn't end up directing, and I have directed some stuff that I didn't, you know, originally write. On all of them, though, I guess I ended up doing a fair amount of rewriting, either with the original writer or not. But there's just, I don't know, they've always sort of needed some work, and so. But I mean, yeah. But I mean, Pompatus of Love, I wrote with two friends. Went to Coney Island, I wrote with one of the same friends from that movie. Yeah, you know, the last movie I did, which hasn't been finished yet, I did a complete page one rewrite. In fact, they hired me to rewrite it and then direct it. Mm-hmm. So, but Man from Earth was a situation where I was offered this script. I'll just tell you how Man from Earth came to be. Yeah. You're probably going to say anyway, right? Okay. So the way Man from Earth came to be was I had done a movie that I'd been hired to direct. It was called October 22, and that was a script where it was in pretty good shape, but it needed some fixes, and I worked with the writer on that one. He's gone on to become a really successful TV writer producer. But Fred Golan was his name. So I did that movie, and on that movie there was a producer who was a lawyer, and the way he got the movie together was he had some actors who were clients, like Michael Pare and Ernie Hudson. They were clients of his as a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
So he got them attached to the movie to work basically for nothing. And so that meant that he could get all these name actors in this movie for very, very little money. And so Avi Lerner from New Image basically funded it. It was $1 million. So I had done, I guess 2 movies at that point. So he hired me to direct it. And then the line producer of that movie was this guy named Gary Depew. And Gary and I became good friends. And Gary was friends with lots of people in the business, and he got his hands on the Man from Earth script because Emerson Bixby is the son of Jerome Bixby, right? Jerome Bixby had written it literally on his deathbed and then died in, I think, 1995 or 1996. So now it was a few years later. Emerson was going around with the script trying to get it made, working with his manager, who was also a producer. And that manager knew Gary. I read the script. I loved it. I went to a meeting with Gary and with the manager producer guy and with Emerson. I told them what I thought. I had a few things that I thought needed fixing, but basically I wanted to make the movie just the way it was written, which was like 8 people in a cabin. And Emerson loved that, liked me, and then I didn't hear anything. Like suddenly it went quiet. Like I thought, oh, we're going to go make this movie. That's great. And then it went quiet. And years went by, and I kind of forgot about it. Then in 2005,
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to figure out how to get a movie made. And a friend of mine, Dean Alioto, whose claim to fame is he made the first alien autopsy movie. He made this thing. He made it for no money. I shot it on the Handycam. It was like it was way before Blair Witch. It was a fictional movie that was presented as though it was real.
Okay.
As though it was a real documentary. So it became this whole cult thing, Alien Autopsy. So Dean made a movie that he shot on a Panasonic DVX 100. DVX? Yeah, DVX 100. So shot on, little Handycam. But it looked like a movie. Even though we shot it on video, it looked like a movie. And there was another guy in New York, Gary Winnick, who was making movies the same way. And so I was talking to my friend Eric Wilkinson, and we were saying, well, geez, we should do that. We should make a movie for like $100,000 on the Handycam. And he said, well, have you written anything that we could do that way? And I said, no, everything I've been writing has been bigger than that. But then I remembered Man from Earth. So Eric found Emerson's, sorry this is taking so long. Eric found Emerson's number, and we called Emerson, and I said, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I read, we met, and he said, remember you? Yeah, you're the only director who ever wanted to make the movie the way my dad wrote it. They had met with lots of other people. Like, in other words, this manager-producer guy had said, well, shit, if the first guy we met with loves it and wants to do it, we can get somebody better than him to make this movie. So they went off looking for bigger directors, but everybody else basically wanted to take what was the script and make that like the first act. And then after that, he's on the run from the people that want a sample of his blood, or from some bad guy, or the government, or whatever. So I was the only one apparently who just wanted to shoot it, as it was written. So I said to him, well, and he had, by this point, of course, had separated from that manager-producer guy. So I said, look, I don't have any money, but if you give me the script, I promise to go ahead and do it. And then there you go. We made the movie. Sorry that was so long.
That's fine. I mean, it's always nice to hear like how a movie came about, because it just takes you like 1.5 hours to watch it, but you never really know how long the process has been to bring it to that length. There's so much behind it. Which brings me to my next question. When it came to something as limited budget, limited location as Man from Earth, how was the preparation time? How did you plan out the pre-production for this?
Well, clearly the Man from Earth is reminiscent of 12 Angry Men, right? Yeah. Sidney Lumet's classic movie. Now that, if you remember, that was originally a TV movie, like a live TV presentation. That Sidney Lumet directed because he was a big TV director.
Yeah.
And then he had the opportunity, thanks to Henry Fonda, to turn it into a movie. And the way he did the movie was, because I read his book, and the way he did the movie was they rehearsed for 2 weeks. And then they shot for 2 weeks, and they block shot it, meaning they set up every camera position. Like the camera's going to be here pointing at the corner. And then they basically just shot everything in that corner. Every actor, every time anybody did anything in that corner, they shot it twice. Once with the sun and once with the rain. And they just went around the room, and that's what they shot in. So I thought, well, that's a pretty good model. Maybe I should try something like that. Except I didn't have 2 weeks to rehearse and 2 weeks to shoot. I had 1 week to rehearse and 1 week to shoot. And it turns out you can't just compress it. It turns out you can't do 2 weeks of work in 1 week. It just doesn't work. So we did have the week of rehearsal, and it helped enormously. Mm-hmm. But we still, and we even had we rehearsed 5 days in a room, and then 1 day actually on location. Kind of figuring out how and where we were going to shoot things, and that helped a lot. But still, I wasn't able to shoot the movie in 7 days. I had to go to an 8th day. I realized by lunch on day 1. It was going to take longer. Well, what happened was John Billingsley, who plays Harry, came up to me at lunch. He came up to me at lunch on day 1, and he said, "So I just want you to know that if you need an extra day, I'm available. And I think some of the other people are too." And I said, "What? No. I'll make up we're behind, but I'll make it up after lunch, and everything will be fine, and we won't meet." And then by the end of the first day, I went back to him, and I went to all the other guys. I said, "Yeah, I'm going to need that day. I'm going to need that extra day." So we shot for 8 straight days. We didn't even take a break. Normally you do 5 or 6 days and take a weekend. But everybody just wanted to go straight through. So we just went. Plus, I couldn't afford a break because it would have meant a second week on the equipment. It would have killed us. So we went 8 straight days.
That's crazy because
the rehearsal did help a lot. The rehearsal helped a lot. Not because what I wanted the rehearsal to achieve was that all the actors would be absolutely off book. They would absolutely know all their lines. And that did not happen because being actors, they wanted to spend a lot of time talking about what does this mean and why does this character do that? And he would never say this, and
yeah.
And it was funny because every time somebody was, like adamant that a character wouldn't say this or wouldn't say that, by the time we had gone through it a number of times and discussed the character, they always ended up not wanting to change any lines. They always ended up realizing that all the lines were exactly what they should be and that nothing needed to be changed. It was very interesting. Wow. Also, though, pre-production invaded that week. Like, I thought, okay, I got 5 days of rehearsal. But we also had to fit wardrobe fittings in there, and other crises would come up, and I would get pulled out of rehearsal for an hour or 2 at a time, or an actor would have an audition for a pilot, so they would leave for half a day, because I wasn't really paying them. No, I was paying them. I paid them for 2 weeks, but if somebody says, "Oh, I have some big meeting or I have a big audition," you have to let them go.
Yeah. Sure.
So I didn't quite get that full week of rehearsal that I wanted.
So how much improvisation did you allow your actors on set? I mean, like you said that they didn't really want to change any lines or anything as such, but was there anything that you allowed for improv? Was there any room at all?
It wasn't even a question of allowing. It wasn't a question of allowing. It was clear that this was an amazing script. And it's very rare to have a week of rehearsal on a low-budget independent film. I mean, it's rare to have a week of rehearsal on any kind of film. I'm sure you've done quite a few of these interviews at this point. You people are lucky to have a day or two to really get together and go through the script or do a couple of readings, table reads or whatever. But I mean, this was like full-on rehearsal. So a couple of the actors, signed on basically because of that. They just were so excited about the idea of getting you know, getting that kind of an experience of rehearsing for a week and shooting for a week on a movie. So what I'm saying is it created an atmosphere where it was more like a play. And on a play, nobody changes words. You know, this is the script and this is what we're all saying and doing. If you have a problem, let's talk about how to make it not a problem. But this is the script. So there was, I would say, no ad-libbing.
Wow, that's crazy. So productions other than The Man from Earth. So, I mean, how, you know, you work with on other movies for lower budgets as well. How do you, you know, work around with the time, and like, how do you manage to get, you know, elicit really good performances from actors? Do you have any tips on that?
Well, just the same thing everybody else would say, which would be to hire good actors. And I can tell you, I have made bad hires a couple of times. And it's, I mean, I remember them like they were yesterday, you know, the bad hires, because there were two that really stand out.
Okay.
One on that movie I was talking about before, and one on the movie that I did, the last movie I shot, the one that unfortunately didn't get completed. And it's, you know, you're there, you're making the decision, and there's a voice in your gut that tells you this is not the way to go. Mm-hmm. This is not the way to go. But in the case of, I mean, and they both were extenuating circumstances. In the case of the first one, it was a friend's girlfriend. It was one of my best friend's girlfriend. And she had been successful in another country. She was from Europe. And she had been successful in her home country. And so I knew she had talent, and she was very, 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 very beautiful. And I thought I can make this work. And it didn't. And in fact, the actor that she was in her scenes with ended up getting angry with me because he felt that I had hired her for the wrong reasons. And he was like, everybody else in this movie is amazing. Why did you do this to me? And I felt terrible about it. And then the last one, I just had a gut feeling about who to hire. But the casting director was like, this guy is great. He's going to be huge. He's so talented. And I took their word for it, you know, and it was just wrong. It was so, so you say, how do you deal with it? It got to the point, for example, where like I had to give him line readings, you know, because it was a comedy. And very often with a comedy, there's like one right way to say a line. There's one way to say it that for optimum laughs. And anything other than that, it might be funny, but it's not going to be as funny. Mm. So, but sometimes there's just no recovering from it. So on one hand, you know, you say, what do you do? Well, you hire a good actor and you let them do their thing. And so you have to go out of your way to mess them up. But by the same token, if you hire the wrong actor, you're lucky if you can, you know, through line readings and tricky editing and all the rest, and just cutting down their screen time, you know, turn their performance into something acceptable.
And since you mentioned, you know, working things around in the cutting room, do you edit your own films, or do you always have somebody else try that out?
I'm sorry?
Do you edit your own movies? Have you ever tried that, or
No, I always go with an editor. You know, back when I first started and when I was making promos and music videos and you know, industrial films and commercials, I used to edit my own stuff, and then I got busy. I ended up getting I was lucky. I was successful, and so I was very busy, and I literally didn't have time to both, you know, prep the next thing or shoot the next thing and also edit the last thing. So I finally hired an editor, and I forget what piece it was. I honestly forget what was the first piece, but it was so much better. It was just so much better than what I would have done. And I thought, oh shit, you know, I'm going to do this what I'm doing from now on. Like, they make me look good. So that's what I did. You know, just from that point on, I hired the best editors I could, and I would work with them. You know, I mean, I still make my voice very, very heard. Like every cut is still, you know, I still have something to say about every single cut. but you know, it's just so much better working with talented people. The same way, you know, I wouldn't want, like, I know that there are directors who shoot their own stuff. They love that control. But I mean, I like benefiting from the skill and talent and experience of other people. Why not?
Definitely. So, you know, this is something that I've heard, and it's something that I personally do as well. I edit the movie, like I see the edit in my head before I go out there and shoot it. So, how do you think, you know, I think the question that I'm trying to ask is, how valuable do you think, you know, learning editing is for a film director?
Well, let's put it this way. If I was your age, or if I was even 10 or 15 years younger than I am, I would have just grown up editing. I mean, like, in other words, if you're a young person today, you're doing everything. You're shooting it on your phone, you're editing on your computer, you're probably doing visual effects. I mean, it's a whole different thing today. Today, I would expect the default position, especially for an independent filmmaker, I would expect the default position to be that they do everything. And the only reason that they wouldn't do everything is either because they've got friends from film school, you know, who can help them out, or they have a friend who's just a brilliant editor, and so they bring them on. But I mean, you know, when I was coming up, you edited, you know, film. You shot film. You had to cut it with a blade and scrape it with a like a little sandy thing and put glue on. Like, it was, you know, ridiculous. I mean, I knew how to do that. And then when it was non-linear, and then when it was linear video editing, I knew how to do that. But by the time non-linear editing came in with Avid and all that, I was successful enough that I just always had editors doing my editing, and I never learned. You know, I finally bought an Avid setup about 15 years ago, and I took the course and I learned, but then I didn't do it constantly, so I forgot it again, and I was like, oh, shit, too old for this shit. I mean, let me put it this way. I wish I'd been editing for the last 30 years. I really do. And I would absolutely encourage anybody, because even like my friend of mine, Mark Pellington, he's a very successful and talented director. He works with editors, but, you know, maybe in the middle of the night, he gets an idea on a scene, and he just goes down, opens up the computer, and messes around with it, you know, because he knows how to use Final Cut, and he does it himself. So yeah, that's an incredibly long-winded way of answering the question. Yes, I would encourage everybody to learn how to edit. Yeah. I should too.
And when it comes to, you know, well, I'm going to bring the attention back to The Man from Earth. So when it came to such a small production, I want to talk about collaborating with people.
Hey, wait, I have a question. Yeah. I see that people are asking questions. Do these get saved? Like, are you going to ask them later, or do they just go away?
So usually we leave the last 15 minutes for the Q&A. But if you want to answer this one,
no. But what I'm saying is, I just don't know about how Instagram Live works. In other words, like they scroll up? Do they go away, or do they go into some bin somewhere where you can look at them after the?
It's still up there. It's still up there. But I think, ever think about making Girl from Atlantis into a movie?
Sure, all the time. I would love to. I sent it to Disney. Girl from Atlantis is a book that I wrote for children, what are called middle readers. So it's not like a picture book, but it's not Harry Potter. It's kind of somewhere in between.
Yeah.
I would love to. I sent it to somebody at Disney once a long time ago, and they basically said, you know, yeah, this is great, but we kind of have our own mermaid franchise. Maybe you've heard of it. You know, so they weren't going to do it. I would love to. I haven't figured out how to do it yet. I sent it to another company, you know, because I thought it could be done as a low-budget animated movie. I mean, it could be done live action, but it would be, you know, like Avatar to do it live action. So I think, and it's for kids anyway, so it might as well be animated.
Fingers crossed that you do get to make it someday.
Yeah, I would love to. Anyway, sorry, you were saying.
I was going to ask about you know, collaborating. I mean, even in an environment as small and limited as Man from Earth, how did collaboration come into play? Like, how helpful was it when it came to collaborating with all these various departments. Now I know when it comes to independent filmmaking, people nowadays, like even productions back home over here, we try to hire as many people as we can to handle various departments, but still you end up doing like quite a lot yourself. But if you do have the luxury of having collaborators in various departments, how does that kind of play out?
Man from Earth was a very, very, very low budget movie, but we still had a full crew. We had we had a 2-person art department, one person, where they kind of divided up everything. Normally on a regular movie, props is its own department. And in low budget movies, that's kind of the first thing to go. Props get folded into the art department. And consequently, props are always a problem. I would say the number one problem on ultra low budget movies is often sound, but it's either sound or props. Like the props are never right. You never have what you need, especially if you need some special. Don't get me started, as they say. But we had a great DP. We had a second camera operator because we had 2 cameras going all the time. We had grips, we had gaffer, we had electrics, we had everything. It just was, we just had one of everything. Instead of 2 or 3 of everything, we had like one of everything and then 1 or 2 swing people. So, no, I'm very much a collaborator. I always work very closely with my DPs. In fact, I've worked with, if you go back and look at how often I've worked with the same people, whether it's the editor or the production designer or the cinematographer or the first AD, as often as I can, I work with the same people. Because if I've worked with someone and they've done a great job, we've gotten along well, and they've done a good job, like why wouldn't I work with them again if I can?
Exactly.
So I do that. They're going to visit from a cat. Are you going to cross the lens? Or are you going to go behind? She's going to go behind. Oh, she's right there. She's like right there. Her head was just outside of the frame.
She'll cameo in a while, I hope.
Hopefully she will. Yeah, no, I love collaborating. I love hiring the most talented people I can and letting them do their thing. I hate having to babysit somebody. Like on the Pompatus on the Pompatus of Love, we had a prop guy who just had the shittiest attitude, and everything was a fight. Everything was a fight, and it was like finally had to fire him because it was like, why are you here? Why are you here if you don't want to be doing this? Just go away. But no, I love when people come up with ideas. I worked with a production designer, Sally Courtois, a couple of times, and she would come up with these great ideas. Priscilla Elliott, who was the production designer on Man from Earth, I ended up bringing her back. She ended up doing me a favor on Man from Earth Holocene, because she's become a big time production designer and a writer and an artist. But as a favor, because Man from Earth was a special experience for a lot of people, she did me a favor on Holocene of designing the book jackets. Remember in Holocene, there's a scene where they discover a whole box of John's books from different periods of his life. So I needed books that looked like the 40s, looked like the 50s, looked like the 60s, because every era has its own graphic style.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Priscilla designed a bunch of those for us. Yeah. That's an example of collaborating, where basically I explain what I need, and then she does the research. It comes back, and it's just great. Maybe I have one little note or whatever, but, it's just hiring a talented person and letting them do their thing.
That's amazing. So for the benefit of the independent filmmakers who are listening and who will be watching this later on, how important do you think it is, from your own experience as a film director, to be open to these suggestions that the collaborators bring? Because sometimes they can lead the movie in, you're going one way, and sometimes it deviates into something that you never thought it would be, and sometimes it ends up being better. So as a film director, how much of an openness do you think someone's got to have when it comes to listening to these suggestions and knowing which suggestions to actually take on board?
Well, you don't know what suggestions to take on board. Like you said. I mean, I've pretty much used the definition of what a director does that you used earlier, which is basically the director is the one who has the whole movie finished in their head before they start. So when people come to you all day long asking questions, should it be round, should it be square, should it be black, should it be white, should the camera be here, should the camera be there, you're answering those questions based on the movie that's in your head. You're like, well, when I watch the movie in my head, the camera kind of sweeps across and ends up in that high angle to show that she's alone, in this. So you explain that to people, and that dictates everything else. It's like, well, that means we don't need a ceiling, but we do need to see the floor.
Yeah.
It means the light can only be coming from there because we're going to see almost all of the room, and we're going to see. So that means you can really only put the light, so all of the answers, right, spring from the shot, and what is a movie? A movie is just a series of shots. You have to get this shot, and then this shot, and then this shot, and then this shot, and then you cut them all together and you have a movie.
Exactly.
Duh. So, so when you're answering all those questions, that's all you're doing. You're just fulfilling. It's like paint by numbers. You know what I mean? Like, well, we need a shot of her picking up this cup. Okay, that goes there. That little piece of the movie is filled in. We need a big shot to show what city they're in. Okay, well, that paints this. So it's just shot by shot. It's just building it brick by brick, shot by shot. What was the first part of the question? I'm not sure I answered it.
How open do you think like a director should be to?
I'm sure everybody you ask this question says the exact same thing, which is you're an idiot if you're not completely open to every suggestion anybody has. I mean, it's you never know. You never know where the great idea is going to come from, and you never know where the correction is going to come from. One of the best stories I ever heard was I interviewed Terrence Young, the director of Dr. No and From Russia with Love and Thunderball and a lot of other great movies. And he told me this story where they were doing a cast and crew screening of From Russia with Love. Now I don't know how well you remember From Russia with Love, but there's this ongoing thing between the Turks and the Bulgarians or whatever, where like they fight each other. They're basically proxies for the East and the West. The Bulgarians are in with Russia, and the Turks or whoever it is are in with there's a scene where Bond is going to go meet the girl in this temple, and this Bulgarian is stalking him, and then he's going to get Bond, and then Red Grant ends up coming from, and he pulls out his garrote and he kills the guy, and then Bond. So they were showing the movie to the cast and crew, and that guy, I guess, was in a scene, like a chase scene later on in the film, because they shot everything all out of order. Mm-hmm. And like the Grip's son, like his 10-year-old son, says, "Hey, didn't that guy get killed in the temple back?" And nobody else had caught it. Everybody else had missed it. Like the Grip's son caught it, and they had to go back and recut the movie.
Wow.
So you never know. You never know where a good suggestion is going to come from, or where somebody is going to say, "Hey, wait a minute, you can't." She was wearing a different. Wasn't she wearing a different shirt in the? You never know.
Yeah. So just that it's about being open to suggestions, but at the same time seeing how it correlates to the movie that you've already figured out in your head.
Yeah. I mean, somebody can have a great idea, and you might even say, "Great, where were you yesterday with this?" Like it's too late now because we already shot the scene that precedes that. We can't. You want to be open. You want everybody to know that they can come to you, but that doesn't mean you're going to take every idea.
Exactly. It has to fit into the bigger picture at the end of the day, and best tell the story.
I mean, somebody has to be responsible.
Yeah.
Somebody has to be responsible for the movie, for the tone, for the performances, for everything. And the way the industry has evolved, that, for better or worse, is the director. There were times. I mean, look, there were times in the past when it was the producer. Like, look at Samuel Goldwyn. Like, he was the kind of producer where, you know, he'd fire directors halfway through. He'd have rewrites done every day. You know, he was basically the most dominant creative voice on his movies. And I'm sure to a degree, like, Harvey Weinstein was going for that. You know, you've heard Harvey Scissorhands, you know, where he would come in and he'd recut, you know, even the most established director because he just felt he knew better.
Yeah.
But so far on almost all of the movies I've made, I've had Final Cut, and, you know, for better or worse, you know, mine has been the dominant voice.
That's brilliant. That's not a luxury that most filmmakers have if you are working in the industry under a studio especially. So.
Well, I was going to say, let's see what happens if I ever get to make a, you know, $20 or $30 million movie. Then let's see if I still have Final Cut. I'm the final word.
Hope you do. We have an amazing question here. So, would you agree that dialogue should be used more so for character development than for plot information? That's a good one.
Well, I mean, what are the tools at your disposal to reveal character, right? What a character does, you know, do they kill a guy or do they run away? Do they bravely step up or do they cower in the corner? How do they react to things? Just even subtle things, like, are they surprised when they hear something, or do they know something already, or do they disbelieve it? You know, and then the third thing basically is what they say. You know, whether they're saying the truth, you know, their truth, or whether they're lying. What emotion they display, and then the actual words. So you utilize all the tools at your disposal. I mean, I do tend to make talky movies, but at the same time, I'm trying to learn as a writer and as a filmmaker, I'm trying to learn how to have less dialogue in my movies, because, you know, it is cinema, and the most you can do without dialogue, I think the more you can do without dialogue, the more cinema-like, the more pure cinema your movies are. As for exposition, you know, that is the bane of every filmmaker's existence. There's certain information that the audience needs to know. Like, there's backstory information or motivation information, or, you know, and so the trick as a writer is to not just do an information dump, you know, where somebody shows up and this says, you know, I mean, you can do that in assignment movies. Like, hey, Agent 6, here's your assignment. You know, Dr. Doofenshmirtz has been da-da-da-da. But you know, in a regular movie, you don't want, like, for example, I know I'm watching the work of a bad writer when two characters, you know, are talking and say, you know, hey, Akash, how long do we know each other? 2 years? Well, in those 2 years, you know, or when someone is somebody's brother or sister and it's like, you know, hey, sis. Nobody calls anybody sis in life. You know, come up with a more creative way to reveal that these people are brother and sister.
Yeah.
Or when people tell each other stuff, you know, well, as you know, Akash, I've been living here for 20 years. And it's like, well, if he knows, why are you telling him? You know, find a better way to say that. People don't tell each other things that they already know. So, so use dialogue. So I try to use dialogue sparingly. I try to have it reveal more about character than about exposition, just because it's more interesting. And of course, when in doubt, conflict, right? When in doubt, if you have some exposition that you have to deliver, have them fight about it. In other words, if you deliver it in the context of some kind of an argument, the audience is registered on the emotional conflict, right? Yeah. The heightened emotions, and so they're not saying, "Wait a minute, I'm being given exposition here." Like, they're thinking more about the fight and about the emotional nature, but they're still absorbing the exposition. Right. So That's the piece of dog food that you can hide the medication in, is a fight.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Hot tip.
So there's another question here about how do you structure and execute with minimal resources? I'm going to convert this question into something like this. So the Man from Earth, one of the main reasons I decided to bring you on board at this time period is due to the fact that the whole world's on lockdown, the entire film industry is on lockdown. It's basically shut down right now with cinemas closed everywhere, and people are it's not easy going out there and shooting something. So with limited locations, I mean, what lessons can filmmakers gain from movies like The Man from Earth when it comes to a pandemic-infested world like this?
Or Mischief Night. Remember, Mischief Night all took place in and around one house. One house. Well, a good friend of mine just wrapped a movie called 18.5 Minutes. It's a sort of Watergate-era dark comedy. And he had started shooting. He only had, I think, like a 16-day shoot, 12-day, like very short shoot. And the whole movie, almost the entire movie, was shot in and around this seaside motel, way, way, way out on Long Island.
This is a feature
It's supposed to be, what?
It's a feature.
It's a feature film called 18.5. It's about the 18.5-minute gap that was famously in one of Nixon's Watergate recordings. The Watergate era. You remember the whole thing with Nixon was that for some stupid reason, he recorded all of his conversations in the Oval Office. And so they found these incredibly incriminating tapes that he had made. Like, why would you record yourself plotting crimes? I don't know. But one key tape had this 18.5-minute gap. So my friend has made a movie that is ostensibly about the 18.5-minute gap. So he started shooting before the pandemic hit, and then the pandemic hit when he had only 4 days left. So he went back finally a few weeks ago and finished shooting. But if anybody was set up for a pandemic shoot, it was him, because they were all living at the motel, because the motel was way the hell out on the very tip of Long Island. So it didn't make sense to go back and forth. So almost everybody from the shoot was living in the motel, so they were already quarantined.
Right.
And in fact, he really should have been able to finish shooting the movie even when the lockdown happened. Unfortunately, there were, I guess, one or two people that were still going to come out from Manhattan for the last part of the shoot. And so the agents of his lead actors called him and said, "You have to shut down." And, you can say, "Look, we can test people. We're quarantined already." But, when the agents of the stars call you and say, "Shut down," you have to shut down. Anyway, but like when we shot Mischief Night, the house wasn't big enough for all of us to stay in. We all were going home every night. But a couple of the people did stay in the house. A couple of people had come out from New York to work on the movie, and they just slept at night. And because we'd rented the whole house, it was unoccupied. So they just stayed in, and they slept in a couple of the bedrooms. The problem is, well, okay, let me put it like this. Yes, obviously, the smaller the cast, the smaller the crew, the fewer the locations, the more contained the movie is, the more possible it's going to be to shoot it under conditions like this. But even if people are going home at night, or if they have their weekends off, you're still inviting a lot of risk. Now, having said that, I have friends who are making movies right now. I have friends who are working on television shows right now. I have people who are making movies right now. And there's sort of I know people who are making micro budget movies where they are just hoping for the best. They're testing people every few days. Everybody's wearing masks. Everyone's got a little box meal, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, it's not like these big shows where there's all, I mean, I heard that on a network show, I heard that on basically on the average feature film, especially low budget, right now, it's costing about 20% of the budget just to deal with COVID. Between testing, the extra people you have to hire, the extra you have to pay for catering, the extra precautions, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's about 20%. But then on like a big budget TV series, I was watching a seminar the other day with Paris Barkley and a few other people. He's on some big like Chicago Fire or whatever, one of those shows. He said they're spending $900,000 an episode extra to deal with COVID.
Wow.
So I guess if you were, you know, ask me for my recommendation would be to figure out if you can, to number one, get to shoot as short as you can. Number two, see if you can go straight through. You know, in other words, not even have days off. Or maybe have like one day off.
Stretch.
What?
Go shoot it at a stretch and finish it.
Yeah, go straight through. And then, you know, and then try to quarantine everybody. In other words, you know, obviously you have to have very, very limited locations and try to get everybody, you know, in the same motel or the same mansion or the same, you know, whatever it is, and just get everybody, and get everybody. There are these different bubbles. There's like group 1, group 2, group 3, but on very, very low budget movies, like with very, very small crews, everybody's group 1.
Yeah.
And if you can make everybody group 1, that is going to make life a lot easier. But the only way to do that is to have a very small cast and a very small crew. For example, one of the things I've done during this pandemic is I wrote a movie. You know, I wrote, it doesn't take place during COVID or during the lockdown, but it's like Mischief Night. It almost all takes place in one house. It's got very few locations, very small cast. Because I was thinking, how could I possibly, you know, get a movie made for a very, very low budget under these conditions? So I wrote a movie, you know, a thriller that could be made with these limitations in mind. No crowd scenes, no restaurants.
It's about being prudent and using you know, everything at your disposal to your advantage, using your limitations to your advantage, I guess.
Well, I don't know if they're to your advantage, but you have to be aware of them. You have to be realistic. You know, like I've made a couple of movies for the Asylum, right? The Asylum, the people who legendarily made Sharknado.
Sharknado, yes.
And one of the frustrations about working for the Asylum is they don't encourage you to work within the limits.
I lost you there for a minute. Where is it? Lost you there for a minute. Lost you there.
Yeah, and I lost you.
Yeah.
Was I just frozen to you? Because you were frozen to me.
Yeah, you're frozen here.
Okay. So, yeah, well, I stopped talking anyway because I assumed that was the situation.
The Asylum. Working with the Asylum. That's
right. So one of the problems with the Asylum is they encourage you to think like you're making a $150 million movie, even though you're making a movie for $150,000. And so you just run into trouble all the time because none of what you need to bring that to the screen is there. You don't have the set, you don't have the extras, you don't have the props. You know, you think they assure you that you'll fix it in post, you know, with visual effects, but then half the time they don't deliver the visual effects that you were promised, you know, so you just end up with a movie that's just nowhere near as good as it could be if you had just been like, okay, I made 3 movies for them, and one of them, well, one is just like a Lifetime thriller, so that one is fine. But one of them is Abraham Lincoln versus Zombies, which is very contained. And so it mostly works. But even that movie, there were scenes I had written, and then I found out on the day, oh yeah, we don't have any of that. None of it. None of the stuff that's in the script, we don't have any of it. Sorry. So like that morning, I had to come up with a whole new day's worth of stuff to shoot. Like on the fly, which is nuts. But at least since most of that movie was contained, it didn't affect most of the movie. But the other one, 100 degrees below zero, it's ridiculous. It's supposed to be like a day after tomorrow kind of movie, or like one of these ice, because it takes place at it's a big disaster movie, and it's like just a joke because you just didn't have any of what you needed every day, so you're trying to paste it together after the fact. You need to, like, to put it another way, very often when I do panels or whatever at film festivals or something, people say, what's your advice? Like, what would you advise, first time or young filmmaker? And my advice is look at what you have and make a movie with that. Does your uncle own a ranch with a bunch of horses? Write a movie for a ranch with a bunch of horses. That's good production value. Do you live in New York City? And like, you live in a cool neighborhood? Well, just have it all take place on the streets of New York City because it costs nothing to shoot on the streets of New York City. Does your aunt own this cool abandoned, monastery or whatever? What do you have? What do you have access to? Like in your case, you're a martial arts expert. You have a bunch of friends who know martial arts. So you don't have to hire stuntmen. You don't have to hire stunt coordinators. You can, you know enough about fighting that you can do cool fighting stuff yourself. Well, then, do cool fighting movies. It's which you're doing, obviously. Look at what you. Oh, what better example is there than Michael and Mark Polish, right? Who were identical twins, and so they wrote and made a micro-budget movie about conjoined twins.
Yeah.
Because who else could do that?
Exactly, that's crazy.
and that really got them on the map.
So we are in the final 5 minutes, and I think we're gonna have to wrap things up kind of quickly. So, Richard, I'm gonna need, we gotta keep this tight. So, we have.
Sorry.
That's all good. So, if you come up with plot points for a certain story, but not the entire screenplay, how would you go about coming up with ideas to connect the points?
Oh, I always make a treatment, right? So whether, so if I come up with a cool beginning or a cool ending or a cool middle, I basically just start with an outline. And even if that outline is 2 sentences, like this happens. It's like, okay, well, then how do we get from this to this? And then you write a sentence in between those two and say, well, then what would happen after? And you write it, and you just start out with just sentences. And the whole thing might be 5 sentences long, but then it's 20 sentences long, and then it's a page. And then you just keep filling in. Well, what happens? How do they get from here to there? Why does she do that? You just keep filling in until finally you have a 3, 4, 5 page treatment. And from that, you can write a screenplay.
Gotcha. So, if you take Man from from concept to, production, and then you eventually screen this at the San Diego Comic-Con Film Festival, and then thereafter, the movie kind of blew up on what you call file sharing sites like like torrents. So, and you've distributed the sequel in a way, like you guys uploaded it to the file sharing community as well. How do you see the film landscape, not just the film landscape, but the distribution landscape changing with in the future?
I don't know, but it sucks. It just sucks, and all of these new all of these new technologies and these new streaming services and all these things that seem like they should be creating new opportunities, they're not. It still sucks. It's still, unless you get lucky, and I mean really lucky, like your movie sells at Sundance for $3 million, or you win a bunch of festivals and everybody wants to know, and everyone beats a path to your door and you get hired on a big studio movie.
Yeah.
It's a struggle. You hear about the 10 or 15 independent films that get bought by Netflix or bought by Amazon or blah, blah, blah. But for those, there's hundreds and hundreds more that either never see the light of day or they see the light of day because they are available on Amazon Prime and on VOD and on SVOD and all that, or not SVOD, but AVOD, like Tubi. But that doesn't mean the filmmakers make any money, or that the people who invested in those movies, make a profit. The Man from Earth Holocene. I mean, The Man from Earth Holocene, we spent $300,000 on that movie, and we are still more than 35% away from breaking even.
Wow.
300,000. That is a low budget.
That's very low, yeah.
And it's been seen by millions of people, and we still are very far from breaking even. And that's a movie that was a sequel. That was a movie that there were people ready, waiting to watch it. Imagine, you're just some schmo, you make a movie. No, it's impossible. I don't want to be discouraging, but it's impossible. The only thing I could recommend is, make a movie that is incredibly important to you personally. Like, don't just try to make some generic movie, because you can't do it as well as the people who have the resources. There's no point in trying to make like a commercial movie, quote unquote, because you can't. You don't have the resources. So instead, make something incredibly personal, incredibly important to you, and then make it as cheaply as you can, because every dollar you spend on the movie.
Froze there for a bit.
Still there?
Yeah, I mean, we're halfway around the world, but I think, Richard, that's pretty much all the time that we have, unfortunately. But hopefully, we might be able to get Richard down for another session, guys. And Richard, thank you so much for joining. And Instagram, you guys got up the duration to more than 1 hour, definitely. But we'll be hopefully bringing Richard back for another session. Richard, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's always good to see you.
Likewise. We'll speak soon.
Bye.
See you.